Hello and welcome to this Tuesday's training on pesticides and the EWG's Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. My name is Ashley Anderson, registered dietitian, personal trainer, and owner of Move Fully Nourished. The EWG stands for the Environmental Working Group. The EWG is a non-for-profit group that specializes in research and advocacy in the areas of agriculture, subsidies, toxic chemicals, drinking water, pollutants, and corporate accountability. Each year, the EWG puts out a list of the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen. This is a list to help expose and bring awareness to the produce that has the highest level of pesticide residue and the produce that has the lowest. In short, really, which produce to make sure to purchase organically for the safety of you and your family, and which 15 you can save a little bit of money on and purchase conventionally. But first, before I talk a little about the types of produce, I want to discuss really the health benefits of reducing dietary pesticide exposure, because it's really important. So organic standards prohibit the use of synthetic pesticides, among other things, but eating organic food reduces pesticide exposure and is linked to a variety of health benefits. According to an article published this year in 2021, the peer-reviewed journal, it's called The Nutrients, that's the journal title. In 4 separate clinical trials, people who switched from conventionally grown to organic foods saw a rapid and dramatic reduction in their urinary pesticide concentrations, which was a marker of pesticide exposure. And then additional studies linked higher consumption of organic foods to lower urinary pesticide levels, improved fertility and birth outcomes, reduced incidence of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, lower BMI, and reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. So a couple benefits and things to think about here. Harvard researchers also found that people who ate greater quantities of crops high in pesticides had higher levels of urinary pesticides, so makes sense, but also lower fertility rates. In 2012, so a little bit ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics issued an important report that said children have unique susceptibilities to pesticide residues and the potential toxicity. The Academy cited research that linked pesticide exposures in early life to pediatric cancers, decreased cognitive function, behavioral problems, and it advised its members to really urge parents to consult with reliable resources that provide information on the relative pesticide content of different fruits and vegetables. So really the EWG. A key resource it cited was the EWG, and this is a shopper's guide to pesticides in produce. In an EWG investigation they published last year found that for most pesticides, there's not additional restrictions to safeguard for children's health. And there was a landmark 1996 Food Quality Protection Act required that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to help protect children's health by applying an extra margin of safety to legal limits of pesticides in foods. The EWG found, though, that this tenfold margin of safety was not included in the EPA's allowable limits for almost 90% of the most common pesticides. So they're still at risk. There's a pesticide called imazolol. It's a fungicide that can change hormone levels and is classified by the EPA as a likely human carcinogen. It was detected nearly in 90% of citrus samples and tested by the EWG in 2020, and over 95% of tangerine samples that were tested in the USDA in 2019. And kale remains in the 3rd spot on our Dirty Dozen list, which we'll find out later, and is now joined by collard and mustard greens as being among the produce items with the highest pesticide load. So after being tested for the first time since 2012 and 2011, bell peppers and hot peppers are also included in this year's list for 2021 as the 10th spot. In USDA's most recent tests, the pesticides that most frequently were detected on collard and mustard greens, as also the case with kale, is called DCPA, and it's sold under the brand name Dacthal. The EPA classifies DCPA as a human carcinogen, and in 2009, the European Union banned it. There's so many things that in Europe they ban that they don't ban initially here. So it's important for us to start looking at what other places are are doing. And as they've done in past years, peppers still contain concerning levels of organophosphate and insecticides that can harm children's developing brains, are banned from the use on some crops in the United States, and are banned entirely in Europe again. In 2017, under the Trump administration, the EPA rejected a proposed organophosphate ban, allowing it to remain on the market and in foods. This is not a political post, but something that we need to be aware of. So whether organic or conventionally grown, fruits and vegetables are still critical components of a healthy diet. However, many crops contain potentially harmful pesticides, as we've been talking about, and even after washing, peeling, or scrubbing, which the USDA always does before testing each item. So they peel, wash, and scrub. Since pesticide contamination varies by crop, it's important to understand which items are most or least contaminated, and additionally, fresh items that are most contaminated, such as spinach, strawberries, and other dirty dozen fruits, which we'll go over later, and vegetables still have high levels of pesticides in their frozen forms, so something to consider too. Also important to note that the USDA does not test for all pesticides used in crop production. High levels of glyphosate, for example, can be found in several grains and beans, such as oats and chickpeas, and due to its increasing use as a pre-harvest drying agent. Most notably, the USDA collected hundreds of samples of oats and chickpeas in 2019, and glyphosate, or also known as Roundup, the most heavily used pesticide in the US, is known to be used on these crops. But the USDA has not analyzed them all for glyphosate. So let's get to the EWG's 2021 list for the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. This year on the list of the Dirty Dozen, the produce that has the highest pesticide residues and the ones that I would recommend purchasing organically are, number 1, spinach. Okay, number 2, strawberries. Number 3, kale, collard, and mustard greens. Number 4, nectarines. 5, apples. Grapes, cherries, peaches, pears, bell peppers and hot peppers, celery, tomatoes, and that's 12. 12. Those are the Dirty Dozen. And then the EWG goes on to evaluate over 46 other items. So if you want to see a complete list, you can visit their website. But these are the Dirty Dozen foods that were contaminated with more pesticides than other crops, according to the analysis of the USDA data. The rankings are based not only on the percentage of samples with pesticides, but also on the number and amount of pesticides on all samples and on individual samples. Okay, here were some of the key findings that the EWG put out. More than 90% of samples of strawberries, apples, cherries, and spinach, nectarines, and leafy greens tested positive for residues of 2 or more pesticides. The second one is a single sample of kale, collard, and mustard greens had up to 20 different pesticides. And on average, spinach samples had 1.8, almost 2 times as much pesticide residue by weight as any other crop tested. Hot peppers and bell peppers had the most pesticides detected, and 115 pesticides in total, and 21 more pesticides than the crops with the second highest amount, which was kale, collard, and mustard greens. Okay, now let's talk about the produce on the Clean 15 list. So the EWG's Clean 15 for this year, 2021, starts with avocados, sweet corn is number 2, pineapple at number 3, onions at 4, papaya at 5, sweet peas, frozen sweet peas, eggplant, asparagus, broccoli, cabbage, kiwi, and cauliflower is 12. Mushrooms, honeydew melon, and then the last one is cantaloupes. So those are the 15 on the Clean 15 list that had the lowest amount of pesticide residues. And according to the EWG's analysis of the most recent USDA data, a few of the key findings from what they found is that avocados and sweet corn were the cleanest, fewer than 2% of samples showed any detectable pesticides. The first 7 of the Clean 15 crops that I listed tested positive for 3 or fewer pesticides on any one given sample. And then almost 70% of Clean 15 fruit and vegetable samples had no pesticide residues. So that's pretty good data. Also, multiple pesticide residues are extremely rare on the Clean 15 vegetables. So only 8% of Clean 15 fruit and vegetable samples had 2 or more pesticides detected. You can see the full list of fruits and vegetables on the EWG's website. So let me know if you guys have any questions. This was your Tuesday training on the EWG's guide to the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen and purchasing some of your produce organically and some of your produce conventionally. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Make it a great day.